Chapter 21, Part 1, we're going to look at the modern world. Modernism is really mid-century. Well, actually, the entire 20th century, I would say, is modernism. Postmodernism is the end of the uh, 20th century, and we're going to look at that as well. So we have a lot of art periods, a lot of isms. Notice the isms: neoclassicism, romanticism, realism, impressionism, post-impressionism, cubism, expressionism, fauvism, futurism, surrealism, Dadaism, really. So there's a lot. Fantasy is kind of its own little pocket of its own thing. But there's a lot going on. We have the Industrial Revolution in full swing. And remember, the Salon is usually it's yearly exhibition of the Academy. The academies were really important, especially in France and England. And if you weren't part of the Academy, you weren't going to get shown in the Salon. Okay, so Turner, we look at the Romantic era of the British Salon. That's an example we get from our chapter 2.2, I believe, is where we looked at him, but that's what he's a part of, okay? So we just want to keep that in mind. Oh, no, I think it's in chapter 1. I beg your pardon, chapter 1. So pointillism, something we're going to look at. There's a lot of things to remember out of this segment. So technological progress, meaning the Industrial Revolution. So this creates a middle class because now we have all this mass production and so on. We are getting a wage for our efforts, and then we go off and we have weekends and we have some free time. We don't have a farm as much. There are people with farms still, of course. There are today even. But there are people who are just manufacturing things and then they have spare time. Then we get into mass advertising, consumption, leisure activities, and so on. So art museums are developed in the 19th century. The Louvre, the French museum, very famous, where many works of art are, including the Mona Lisa and the Venus de Milo. That developed kind of during the French Revolution. And remember how Louis XIV goes to Versailles and moves the seat of power from France, which is the Louvre, that's the palace, that's the royal palace, moves it over to Versailles. Sorry, it's in France. They're both in France. But moves it from Paris to Versailles. So the Louvre later, through the French Revolution, becomes the first museum. Then in the U.S., the very first museum, and it's still there today, is the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Okay, so neoclassical style, we looked at that a little bit. So David and Ong, that's how we say this one. That one I actually know. So there's clear contours, clean colors, and precise draftsmanship. And it has to be a historical subject or the Bible, which is sort of history as well to some degree. Some of those are oral traditions. We don't really know the actual the root of those or the historic event. We don't have a year on a lot of things in the Bible in the distant past. So Death of Marat, and this is a historical event. He's a revolutionary and he is killed. And we have our hard lines. We can see all these contours very clearly, right? And then we have Jupiter and Thetis. So we are dealing with a real event, historical. This is not a biblical or a historical event, but a back to classicism in our sense of Jupiter is a god. So this is depicting a god, and he is a bit flat if you look at this outline, because remember our outline is kind of the important thing here. So our space is a little bit flattened. His flesh is not as dimensional with chiaroscuro as some of our Renaissance friends paint things in, but you have to do something heroic, grand. There's an eagle here, powerful, that kind of thing. We're in the neoclassic age. It's not about how do you want to say it's simplified. It is, and it's not over the top and decorative, but it's also about a return to morality and power and a true hierarchy. So these romantic artists that we're going to get into next, the Romanticism, they're rebelling against the age of reason, right? They're rebelling against logic and science, and they're rebelling also against somewhat to a degree about the Industrial Revolution as well. So they have these glorified landscapes. The sky is really important. Picturesque ruins, struggle for liberty, exotic cultures. So we have a couple of artists here, Delacroix and Goya, and we're going to look at Romanticism. So liberty leading the people. In this case, this is supporting a revolution around this time. And first, we have the first French Revolution, 1789, I believe, and we have Bastille Day and the guillotine chopping off Marie Antoinette's head. And then it doesn't totally work, and there's another one. So there's another revolution, and in this case, we're showing upper class, lower class. Everybody's got guns. We're all working together. We're going to take down this aristocracy. We're going to kill the Rococo. We're going to go after, the people in power. And liberty is our Greco-Roman ideal here. And she's kind of like the Venus de Milo. She is topless and she is barefoot. But she is marching right through all this debris, crawling right over the dead and just keep going, right? She's showing strength. This is a symbol for France. Liberty is a symbol for France and freedom. And this is our French flag here, which is still in existence today. But a lot of atmospheric clouds, emotional intensity, and showing that the sacrifice is worth the death that we're seeing. Okay, Romantic era still, and we're dealing with a fantasy scene. So we're going to get into the odalisque in in a little while. But what we're looking here is a harem. We get fascinated with Morocco. We don't always think of the East or how do you want to say the Orient as Morocco, but we do think of the Islamic culture and the difference and the unusual patterning and the fabrics and all these women in a sort of waiting room in a harem waiting to be called by the husband, the multiple wives. So that's fascinating to Westerners, Europeans. Delacroix does do some harem paintings, and so do other people. But it's fascination with the exotic. This is very exotic and strange. The hookah, smoking things, sitting on the floor, all those things. Very exotic and interesting. So some depictions of cultures. How realistic this is, we have no idea because, this is through somebody else's fantasy. Okay, Mr. Turner. We don't have this one. We have a different one in chapter 1. But look at this drama. Oh my goodness. All this wild sky, lots of texture. He puts dirt and all kinds of stuff into this paint. He wants it to look dimensional. It's also called impasto when you build up the paint surface, so it's actually three-dimensional. He's known for his skies and his sunsets, and this is one of the classic examples of this. Large painting, 3 feet by 4 feet, not super large, but this is a slave ship, and he gets into commenting on the slave trade which is happening at this time. And this is a depiction of something earlier from the 1700s, 1780, I think, 1781, where the slave ship is coming to England, and the captain or the master of the slaves is throwing off the dead and dying because the ship captain or whoever's in charge will not get paid for dying or ill or injured slaves. So they would overbook these ships from Africa with like 400 people, and they probably only had room for 300. And they knew that some of them would die or become ill, and then they would get paid for any of the dead ones that they threw overboard. And that's normal to do a burial at sea for somebody who's died on a ship. You don't carry them around for months, but in this case, this practice of throwing over the dead and the people who are not yet dead, and then attacked by fishes and drowning and so on, was a very dark practice, and he was trying to demonstrate that this practice was very illegal and immoral. which of course it is, because in 1840 slavery had ended in England, but there was some word afoot that they were going to bring it back. So he did this painting in protest. Okay, Goya. This that we get into a very intense piece here with a lot of drama and excitement. I'm not going to get too into this because we looked at this earlier, but you can see all this blood and activity and focus on our uprising. These are Napoleon's soldiers, of course. So a lot of things are happening. Napoleon in Spain taking over. Napoleon's armies go all over and create an empire. All right, so now we're going to get into realism. Skipping right along. I know, there's a lot. Each one of these deserves, an hour, but we don't have it. So realism is a shift. Some artists are deciding that neoclassicism and romanticism are sort of over the top. There's always a reaction. It's kind of like each generation rebels against the last, even though there's some valid points to those two styles. Realism, these guys are like, I really want to paint what's really happening around me and not putting fantastical figures in my paintings and so on. And everyday activities are fit subjects for grand scale art. Now, Courbet gets into some trouble here, and we'll look at our piece here. So the burial at Ornans, and Courbet really stirs the pot here. This is 16 feet high. It's 21 feet long. The only thing ever painted on this scale would have been an heroic event, a royal personage, a religious painting. And we have an ordinary person being buried here, and very gritty, realistic people, not high class. Everybody's in mourning and dark and quite intense, sad occasion. Okay, everyday, realistic people. Of course, this is members of the church that are doing the burial rites, and that's how they would be dressed. But it's by no means a glorification of anyone here. It's just simply a commemoration of a burial. So what happens is he brings this into the Salon of 1850, and I'm going to quote from the book, page 474. A critic later recalled, it was as though, a tornado had blown through the room. Admirers held that realism had produced its first masterpiece. But detractors, I quote, thought that Courbet had pushed what they called the cult of the ugly about as far as it could go. The painting offended them on two counts. The first was its resolute refusal to beautify or sentimentalize the scene. The second was its scale. The monumental formats were traditionally reserved for history paintings. Remember, history paintings are the top of the hierarchy for the salon, for the academy, right? And in the salon, they'd be placed in a prominent area. So anyway, this monumental formats were traditionally reserved for history paintings full of important personages. This painting was full of nobodies taken seriously as people. So this was an idea of a democratization of people. So he was kind of a radical, okay? And then he fled the country later because he got into politics, but he was really aiming to stir the pot with realism. And he sets the stage for Impressionism. And I know it doesn't seem like a natural transition, but we'll get into it.